So, what is it that Wolfgang Smith and Malachi Martin have in common? Well, apparently, in the last year and a half of Malachi's life, he was in constant communication with and correspondence with Wolfgang Smith, who, may he rest in peace, is no longer with us as well. And so, at some point, out of deep love for Father Martin and the kindness that he showed to Wolfgang, um, Wolfgang published this book, In Quest of Catholicity. Malachi Martin responds to Wolfgang Smith. Just there is a little blurb on the back, a little endorsement from Luke Bell, OSB, who is a monk of Quar Abbey and author of The Mystery of Identity, which I should probably check that out. Sounds interesting. Quote, he says, "This book touches on nothing less than the intellectual credibility of the Catholic faith. Here, Wolfgang Smith engages in a very personal dialogue with a priest whose overriding concern is the welfare of souls." And I would say that aspect is maybe touched upon very briefly in this compilation of letters. So the book description reads, in a 2-year correspondence with Malachi Martin, Wolfgang Smith broaches a wide spectrum of topics to which Father Martin responds in a way that may surprise many readers. What stands at issue is the meaning of authentic Catholicity, of the universality of Catholic truth. Theologians have long been stymied and misled by what Malachi Martin refers to as an intellectual impasse that needs to be deblocked. Martin and Smith agree on the necessity to open doors and windows, not in the name of an aggiornamento, but for the very opposite reason, to rediscover an ancient wisdom at once theological and cosmological. And I would say, having read through the book, that is, putting it mildly, and is quite clickbaity, for lack of a better term. And so the question then, for someone who is perusing this on a shelf, well, what ancient wisdom is that? What ancient theological and cosmological wisdom is it they're referring to, that they're discussing? And I'll start you off just by reading the table of contents off to you. But before I do that, let me paint a little bit of a picture for you, given the context, given that some of the things that are being drudged back up now that Malachi Martin is back in public consciousness in the Catholic spheres of the internet. Some people are claiming that he was laicized, that he was stripped of his collar and was no longer a priest. There are others that purport that he very much was still a priest, and according to the author of a new book that's out, that Father Martin was actually a secret bishop or cardinal, and that he was kind of like a James Bond, a sort of a celibate 007 for the Catholic faith. And instead of it being Blomfeld and his white furry kitten, his white furry cat, he was battling demons and wolves dressed as shepherds. Uh, so there are some who maintain the moral, religious, and spiritual integrity of Malachi Martin, that he was a champion for tradition, supposedly. Some have said, others have held that he was sort of went along. He sort of got along, went along to get along to help keep the spotlight off of him. But then again, he wrote a bunch of books, did press tours for the books, was on William Buckley's show in the 80s, specifically on the subject of Vatican II and the Latin Mass, as it happens. Then there are others who think that he was a dilettante, that a secret womanizer, and one of the reasons why there are now clerics that wear civies, given his example. And so keep all of that in mind as I read this table of contents to you. There's an introduction. Then there's the first chat. It's broken up into 10 different sections. There's a reason for that. 10 different sections with a postscript, a brief biography, and an index. So the first part. Enter Jakob Boehme. Part 2. Light on von Balthasar. Part 3. Exploring Jean Barea. 4. From Theory to Deathbed Confessions. 5. The kinship between Boehme and St. John of the Cross. 6. Concerning the Kabbalah. 7. The need for a healthy esotericism. 8. St. Catherine of Genoa and the supernatural. 9. From the Threshold. 10. Catherine Pickstock's esoteric Thomism. That's just the table of contents. And so I'd be curious what you all would think, what the book is about, just based off of the table of off of this table of contents. And if you're watching live, I'm curious if you want to drop your thoughts in the live chat. And then for those who are watching the recording afterwards, if you want to make sure to timestamp this part of the video in your comment to share with me your thoughts, your initial impressions upon hearing the titles of the table of contents. So you can pause the video, do that, and then come back. Otherwise, we're going to keep going. Just to continue by saying, this is definitely a course of inquiry that many would say stretches the concept of universality of Catholic truth. Many would say nothing that has to do with Jakob Boehme, nothing that has to do with Kabbalah or esotericism or von Balthasar for many, especially in the trad sphere. This is like especially for folks like Matthew Menard, who just recently had a discussion with Sebastian Morello on what I call the phantom or imaginary controversy related to Morello's use of the lexicon of Hermeticism and magic within a Catholic context, within a desire to see the mystagogic restored. You can watch last week's live stream for that. And I have just recently included a link to the just today released full discussion with those two on the meaning of Catholic. I am very happy that they chose to release it and to not keep it behind a paywall. For those of you who don't know, Timothy Flanders, Kennedy Hall, Nick Cavazos, and Dr. Peter Kwasniewski are now part of a streaming service called Pelican Plus, which is this sort of combination of Netflix versus, or not versus, but Netflix and Hallow rolled into one. What is it? It's Netflix, it's Substack, and it's Hallow rolled into one app for more traditionally minded Catholics. It's very wonderful. They just released a new documentary about education, about modern education, and the solution for the agnosticization of the youth, especially the youth in Catholic families. Definitely worth a watch. I would strongly suggest having a subscription to Pelican Plus. It seems like it's going in a really good direction, and I support all the gentlemen over there, even if they would never support what I'm doing here. With all of that said, but yeah, for people like Matthew Menard and others, hearing that Malachi Martin was at all touching on these subjects would maybe give them pause. For sure, I know I've heard from Menard's mouth in that discussion with Morello that he finds Wolfgang Smith in his later years to be deeply troubling, is, I believe, the phrase that he's used. And all I can say is I don't think Menard doesn't strike me as someone who has taken a lot of time from his teaching at a seminary to engage at all with anything that Wolfgang has written in truth. And I would even go so far as to say that, and while I haven't read it, I've Smith's book attacking and completely obliterating Teilhardism. I think that Wolfgang Smith's opposition to Teilhard de Chardin is important, and I think it's important for especially those of us who have a very special place in our hearts for the efforts of Valentin Tomberg, which I do. As you can see, I got right there is my copy of Meditations on the Tarot, as well as some of his other books, writings that have been published by Angelica Press. One of the things that Tomberg and others in that period of time before there was any action really taken against some of the things Teilhard was putting down, you had people like Flannery O'Connor, as well as a number of individuals, theologians and the like, and laity, who kind of took a liking to some of the things that Teilhard was talking about and teaching. And it's kind of like, it was like a TikTok trend. It was the equivalent of a TikTok trend. He used all these big words and sort of lulled people into a false sense of certainty about about some very erroneous ideas, specifically specifically as it relates to evolution. He tried to integrate evolution into eschatology, which I know folks like my one of my fellow Christian Hermeticists brothers is Scott Mannion over at the Greenwood Fellowship. He seems to kind of take Teilhard the way that Tomberg did. He's very dedicated to the writings of Tomberg and to Rudolf Steiner. And he's an Orthodox Christian, or he's part of an Orthodox Christian church, which I don't hold against him. But he genuinely has phenomenal insights, and he has an interesting, he has a very authentic experience of the practices, the results of those practices that Tomberg kind of hints at throughout Meditations on the Tarot. So if you want to check that out, discern it for yourself, I would point you in that direction. But we have one of the little poison pills. One of the things, aside from the esoteric and occult references in Tomberg's works, the other thing that really gets the opponents of Christian Hermeticism is this reliance on some of the passages that Tomberg peppers throughout the book, which he takes from Teilhard de Chardin, however it's pronounced. Deeply unfortunate. It is a deeply unfortunate circumstance, and so I here on this channel and in my practice, I keep it in mind the errors present and the questionable animating spirit behind what Teilhard was up to. One of the people who has really caught on to the diabolic nature of Teilhard's ideas was Wolfgang Smith. He wrote an entire book refuting Teilhardism, which I have to read. But of all the interviews that I've listened to with Wolfgang, he's very explicit in his dislike for Teilhard de Chardin. I don't know why I say der Chardin instead of de Chardin. I guess that's my German coming out, Southern Bavarian coming out. So, gosh, completely forgot where that train of thought was going, and apologize for the getting sidetracked. But anyway, so yeah, those were the table of contents. And already, as I mentioned, plenty of fodder for the likes of Menard and company. One of the interesting things in here is Wolfgang's insistence that and it almost seems as if in these letters especially, I have yet to read what is it, The Wisdom of Ancient Cosmology and Christian Gnosis by Wolfgang. I have yet to read those. Those are on my list. But I get the sense in reading these letters that he sent to Father Martin, I suspect that Wolfgang had a similar view of what Catholicism means, and I also see it in some of the writing of Sebastian Morello, who, from what I understand, is now on the board or is a chairman of the what is it? The oh, what's it called? The Philosophia Initiative, which is who publishes all of Smith's writings. Um, that all of Smith's writings that have not been published elsewhere. And it's something that I touched on a video I did quite a while ago, um, almost exactly 2 years ago, that I put out for the feast, or related to the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And the research of Gonzalez, published by Sophia Institute Press, which was the Guadalupe and the Flower World Prophecy. And I think Wolfgang understood this idea better before I knew about the Flower World Prophecy in Guadalupe. This idea that and it's not a new idea. It's actually a very old idea that all of history is Christocentric. All of history. All of history before Christ and all of history after Christ is Christocentric. And with this understanding comes a realization that the perennial philosophy is the second person of the Holy Trinity. And it is espoused by the institute that he himself, the Logos, began on earth, which is the Catholic Church. And that all of human history, all our pitfalls and triumphs in secular life and in academics, specifically in philosophy, in the application of mathematics to philosophy, to theology, both pre and post Christian, that it is all it's consummated. That Catholicism is the perennial philosophy. It is the perennial wisdom that people like René Guénon and the other traditionalists, the other perennialists, Catholic or otherwise, forgot. They either forgot or they had some hang-ups about Catholicism, Christianity, to the point, to their detriment, and to the point that they impregnated their writings with some erroneous conclusions. That leads to rightful skepticism on the part of people like Menard and others like him. And the skepticism is well founded. It's not like it's not always pearl clutching. It's not always reactionary. Uh, it's not always just it's not always constant. What's a good phrase for it? It's not always a constant barrage against Catholic pistics. I sort of I didn't coin anything, but I just from my last live stream I brought up the reintroduced the concept of pistis and gnosis from Saint Clement of Alexandria, and how both pistics and Gnostics are part of the same church and they depend upon each other because the one grounds the other. Um, the one the one helps to deepen the faith of the other, and the other helps to ground those that can often be in the greatest danger as they approach the cloud of unknowing, or they are going through the cloud of unknowing before reaching an understanding gifted to them by grace of the Godhead in this life. You have to have both. Pistis and gnosis have to work in tandem. Another way to put this is the exoteric faith and the esoteric faith, or should kind of flip it around, the faith esoterique and the faith gnostique have to work together. And together they are the Catholic Church. Together they cling to the deposit of faith. The one upholds what is certain of the deposit, and the other pioneers the depth of what the deposit means and how it expresses God and how it affords us to experience God, even in this life. That's why not everyone is a mystic. Only Catholic Gnostics can be mystics. Catholic pistics tend to be the martyrs, the warriors of virtue in the face of secular hedonism or the like. So there's often a difference between saints such as Saint King Louis IX and Saint Hildegard von Bingen, or Louis IX and Catherine of Siena. Catherine of Siena was already a model of virtue, but she had what Tomberg calls the Gnostic sense. She had been touched by God in a way that Catholic pistics never really are. And so for the Catholic Gnostic, for the more mystagogic Catholic, the understanding of the deeper moves in history, the providential moves in history, the discernment of God's hand in history, not just in secular history, but in philosophical history, in theological history, and being able to see the beautiful flowers that are entangled with thorns whose roots are mixed with those of weeds. It's the job mystagogic pioneers, um, those that plunge the depth of the faith, it's their job to go and rescue those beautiful flowers from suffocation by thorns, bushels, and brambles. And that all happens at the edge of the garden. I've used this analogy before. There's this garden, well tended, beautiful. Everything is everything is perfect. There's nothing is aesthetically disharmonious in any way in this garden. And the Catholic pistics are in the middle of the garden. It's where they're hanging out. Meanwhile, the Catholic Gnostics are at the edges of the garden, slowly expanding the edges of the garden by trimming the verge, by trimming to trim from saving the good seed from the bad soil, from clearing the weeds, from tilling that soil, restoring that soil so that it can be good soil to receive good seed, and to further expand that garden. And every once in a while, they have to take a break, because when you're in the weeds, you get cut, you get stung, you get scratched, you bleed. You might potentially even get poisoned. So there's a heroic level of discernment that happens at the edge of the garden. So to step away from the metaphor, there's a lot of discernment. There's heroic levels of discernment that are required. Oftentimes that can only happen by grace. Whenever the soul of the faithful, whenever an individual soul is plunging the depths of the faith. And plunging the depths of the faith isn't just reading books. It isn't only reading scripture. And it isn't only reading scripture via Lectio Divina. It requires, like I said, heroic discernment. And one of the only ways that can really be achieved, aside from grace, nothing happens without grace. But you have to cooperate with it. And not only do you have to cooperate with it, you have to cooperate with it properly. And that level of discernment can be achieved by something that Tomberg, in Meditations on the Tarot, right there, talks about extensively, which he calls concentration without effort. Again, if you want to know more of what that looks like within at least an Orthodox, big O Orthodox Christian context, I would refer you to Scott Mannion over at Greenwood Fellowship. He has done probably the most work of anyone today that has spoken openly, who lectures openly and discusses openly the ways to put it in practice. And he's done the deep dive into showing how it pretty much tracks one for one with like St. John of the Ladder, with the Philokalia, with Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross. And it's the work that Scott Mannion has done is invaluable for those of us who would dare to brave the pursuing Christian Hermeticism, Sophiergy, let alone who just any plain cradle Catholic who's just trying to die a good death, a happy death, and a holy death, who's seeking to fulfill their life in the spiritual sense more. You can't. Scott Mannion's content is a good springboard for coming to understand within a modern lexicon the things that Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, what they talk about, what the Carmelites talk about, what the Desert Fathers talk about. That's a good place to go if you're interested in that. But yes, discernment is absolutely key. So let's go ahead. While we have about, I want to try to keep these streams about an hour and a half. So we're already kind of an hour in, kind of gone off the rails a little bit. Hopefully, as I can keep this up, I can get a little bit better at staying on track and providing you all with better experience. But just as a reminder, this channel is primarily dedicated as it's a journal, it's a video journal, to explore these ideas and to more or less colloquialize in the sense of it's like a colloquy or a soliloquy. I'm talking to you all, and some of you leave some very very interesting comments, heartwarming comments. Some, very few, thankfully, kind of lash out at me from time to time with some of the things I say, especially when I bring up Hildegard von Bingen and crystals. That's usually when I get hit up by the sedes, the internet fungi, the Catholic fungi. They cannot stand when I say that crystal healing is Catholic. But anyhow, so I just wrote a few notes down this evening while I was prepping. So there are numerous places scattered throughout the book. The format of the book is Wolfgang writing a letter or two, sometimes three, to Malachi Martin, and then Malachi will send a response. Sometimes I wonder if Smith liked Malachi more than Malachi liked him. However, Malachi is always incredibly kind in his responses to Smith. Very brotherly. It's wonderful to see. It's touching. It's touching how quickly they became brothers in the faith, and how they came to trust each other. There's references in the letters throughout that talk about conversations that they've had in person or over the phone. So there are some gaps. So you kind of have to bear those a little bit. It's not a long book. I mean, look, I read it in 2 days, and that's with being interrupted doing other things. So I just kind of jotted down some quick things that kind of struck me as interesting as I was flipping through my the passages that I highlighted and the pages that I dog-eared, which I only do with my paperbacks. These I would never do. I would never do that to these, or these would never happen. But anyhow, early on in some of Wolfgang's earliest letters, specifically one of his first ones, on page 16, Wolfgang makes an admission. He makes an admission that he is heavily influenced by René Guénon, which again, as I've mentioned, like, true perennialism is Catholicism. Guadalupe is proof of this with the research that we have now available. I think, Sophia Institute Press. Just go read Guadalupe and the Flower World Prophecy. Your mind will be blown, and then you will begin to appreciate this concept that perennialism is Catholicism, that the perennial philosophy is Catholic theology. And so yeah, it's like his second letter to Malachi. He